Okay, I see lots of people still coming online, but in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning to everyone, and welcome to Driving and Aging, the Impact of Physical and Cognitive Changes. And as always, we welcome all of you back to our webinar series, which our sponsors are back to for this year. We have Care Choices, Hospice and Palliative Services, Irvine Clinical Research, O'Connor Mortuary, and Caring Companions at Home. We appreciate our community sponsors so much. It's a great collaboration, and we're excited to get underway with a new year, new speakers, new topics. And as you know, our sponsors provide these webinars as a service to the community on topics that are beneficial to anyone who cares for or works with older adults. So we know that you're going to find today's presentation informative and useful. Let me tell you a little bit about Debbie. She is Debbie Ricker, and she's an occupational therapist with over 30 years of experience in developing and implementing treatment programs for persons living with dementia. She uses a compassionate care approach with positive behavior and human-centered care to personalize her treatment programs. She is a driving rehabilitation specialist working with older adults who have impairments as a result of medical conditions such as Parkinson's, stroke, traumatic brain injuries, different types of cognitive impairment, and dementia. She's a certified dementia trainer and one of the nation's leading experts on driving and dementia. Debbie has presented on the state and national levels regarding the impact of dementia on driving. In addition to the driving assessments, Debbie also provides in-home safety assessments and evaluations for individuals with cognitive impairments. Her passion is to assist the individual and their family or their primary caregivers to improve the quality of life for all. And she's a consummate professional and a very caring and passionate individual. We've known her for many years, and I think you're going to really enjoy hearing what she has to say and will benefit from her presentation. And she just published a book on the topic of how dementia impacts driving, and we'll give you information toward the end of the presentation about that, and that's available on Amazon. And so with that, you've been seeing Debbie. We're going to now make sure you're off on mute. We're going to turn things over to Debbie for her fabulous presentation. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much. So I'm going to start out with a quiz question. You can answer this to yourself. True or false, most older drivers cease or restrict their own driving when they experience changes in their ability to drive. The answer to this is true. Most older drivers do cease or restrict their driving. The problem is that people who have cognitive impairment don't have the ability to self-regulate. They don't have the ability to notice changes in their ability to drive. And typically people with dementia or some kind of cognitive impairment will not stop driving unless there's intervention from the family and or medical professionals. So driving is a very complex task. Research says that the human brain was not created to multitask. And so we know that driving is the ultimate multitasking because there's so much stuff that we have to pay attention to. Not only do we have to know what all the gauges say in the car, we have to know everything that's going on around us, in front, beside, behind us. We have to know what all the laws of the land are. We have to know what signal lights are indicating to us. And there's split-second decisions that we have to make all the time. But we also have to have good judgment. We have to have the ability to see everything that we need to see. We also need the proper strength and reaction time. And it's normal for the aging brain and body to have slower reaction times. So that means that we're not going to respond to things as quickly as we used to when we were 25 years old. And the brain with dementia, there are significant changes in driving. And usually, as I mentioned, the person doesn't even know that they're having difficulty with driving. So what is our belief system about driving? When I talk to people in the community, typically they say it's a right for them to drive. And a lot of people have told me, I've been driving since I was 16 years old, and I'm a great driver, and there's nothing wrong with my driving. Also, we typically believe that being able to drive is a symbol of adulthood. I bet you couldn't wait till you were 16 years old to go to the DMV and get tested so that you could get your driver's license, because I know that's the way I felt. It's also freedom and independence. We can go anywhere we want, anytime we want, if we can drive. Sorry about that. So these are the reasons that seniors typically will stop driving. One is if they start to have visual issues, if they have cataracts or glaucoma or something like that, it does make it more difficult to drive. Sometimes people have emotional changes as they age, and so they become more nervous, or they even get angry at other people when they're driving. And then sometimes people with diminished cognitive abilities will also decide to stop driving. It's very common for us to have slower reaction time as we age, and so it's more difficult to respond to all the crazy drivers around us. And there's also medical conditions, including medications, that can interfere with a person's ability to drive, such as Parkinson's. It can make it very difficult for a person to drive safely. Sometimes people have financial difficulties as they age, and so it's very expensive to be able to drive a car, to buy one, to maintain the car, to pay for gas. All those things are very expensive, and so sometimes people will stop driving because of their financial difficulties. Some people will stop driving if they have a pattern of close calls. So they're not having accidents, but they're getting close to it. Sometimes people have lack of confidence. I know here in Southern California, our freeways are crazy. We always have construction going on, and people drive 80 miles an hour on the freeway, even though the speed limit is 65 or 70. So it's kind of scary to drive out there. And sometimes people will stop driving because their family or friends encourage them to stop driving. And then loss of license. Although I did test a gentleman who was 93 years old, he lost his license because he caused an accident. And his attorney asked me to test him. So when I tested him, I asked him for his driver's license. He gave me his California ID. And I said, this is not a driver's license, this is an ID. And he said, no, that's my driver's license. So what that told me is he had completely forgotten that he had his license taken away because of the accident that he caused. And he only had a California ID. So what changes typically as we age? Our ability to focus on close-up objects is more difficult. So for example, I've seen people really struggle to try to read what's on their medication bottle because the printing is so small. Or a menu in a restaurant. So it might be difficult for people to focus on that. And the ability to switch from near to far is really important, because we have to know what all the gauges in the car say. We have to know what all the cars are doing around us. We have to constantly look back and forth. We have to scan constantly when we're driving. And it's more difficult to do that as we age. Also, our peripheral vision changes as we age. So normally we have a great deal of peripheral vision, but as we age, it gets smaller and smaller till a person only has about this much range that they can see and process the information. So it's not like a person is blind. It's just that they don't have the ability to see beyond this point. So everything that's going on in this section is not available to them because they can't see it and process that information. Our pupil reaction time also changes as we age. So that means driving from light to dark, for example. Our pupils are not going to react as quickly as they did when we were younger. Most people, as we age, have arthritis, and so that can make it difficult to maneuver the car. Oftentimes people have back and neck pain that can also interfere with driving. And then some people have a loss of high frequency sounds. I tested a woman who the driving instructor said, make a left turn at the next signal light. And just after he finished saying that, both of us heard and saw two emergency vehicles that were entering into the intersection. She tried to go out into the intersection. She did not see them or hear the sirens. And it just so happened when we were going the other direction, the same two vehicles were going through that intersection again. And again, she did not see or hear them. She had totally lost her high frequency level of hearing. It's also difficult to divide attention. So paying attention to the gauges of the car and all the cars around us and remembering all the laws of the land, all of those things, it's hard for us to switch back and forth as we age. Our brain signals start to slow down a little bit so we don't process things as quickly, and then our sensory perception becomes weaker. And especially if a person has something like peripheral neuropathy, so it means that they have no sensation in their feet, they won't be able to drive safely because they don't put their foot on the gas and brake pedal accurately, and it's difficult to switch between the two pedals. Also, as we age, the brain needs more information to make a decision. We need more time to do that. And so it makes people slower when they're responding to things as they drive. So what changes with vision as we age? There's different types of vision. So dynamic visual acuity is the ability to see a moving object. And then depth perception, of course, is how far away things are. And I see this all the time in my driving assessment, that people often have depth perception issues, and so they don't know how far away the pedestrian is or the car is, and they'll drive too close to them because they've lost a portion of their depth perception. There's also the useful field of view, and as I mentioned earlier, it's the area that you can see it visually and then process that information and interpret what it is that you need to do. With contrast sensitivity, it's seeing similarly colored objects. So if there's a bank of green bushes and trees and there's a green car driving in front of it, you have to be able to see the difference between the car and the bank of bushes. And then there's the perceptual reaction time. So it's the speed that you can process the information that you're taking in. And glare recovery is particularly hard with those halogen lights because essentially they blind you temporarily. And so when you're driving at night, you have to be able to continue driving in spite of those halogen lights that you often see on the other side of the road. And then we also need good peripheral vision. We have to be able to see things that are going on beside us as well as in front and back. And then light-dark adaptation is when you're entering or leaving a tunnel. So what kinds of vision impairments happen typically as we age? Not everybody has these conditions, but some people get cataracts. So what happens is you become very sensitive to light and glare, and it's more difficult to drive at night. With glaucoma, it's as if you're wearing some binoculars, and so you don't see anything. If you put your hands up to your face like this and try to look in your periphery, obviously you're not going to see what's on the left and right because that vision is gone. And with macular degeneration, if you make two fists and put them in front of your eyes, that's what macular degeneration does, is it causes central vision to be lost. And so you won't be able to see things that you would normally see. Okay, so this is what you typically see when you're driving in your car through your windshield. What do you see? You see the pedestrians, you see cars in front of you, surrounding you, you see the signal light ahead, you see the cross traffic, you see different buildings. So that's what we normally see as we're driving. But what happens with cognitive impairment, dementia, is that your ability to see and process information is greatly reduced. So now if you look at that white section, that's about all that a person with cognitive impairment can see and process. So you can see that they're missing so much information when they're driving because they cannot see everything in the windshield like you and I can. And that's why it's so difficult for people with cognitive impairment to drive, because this is something that typically happens in the progression of dementia or cognitive impairment. So what changes with normal aging? One of the things that I see people do all the time is they make a left turn with oncoming traffic. If you have difficulty with your perceptual skills, being able to determine how far away the traffic is, and you make a left turn with oncoming traffic, you're making a big mistake. It's a huge difficulty because you don't know how fast they're coming or how far away they're coming. Also, keeping in the correct lane position. Now, these things that I'm going through right now, these are often things that I see, difficulties or mistakes that I see when I'm doing the driving assessment. People with dementia often are unable to keep the car in the correct lane position, and they'll wave in and out, or they'll drive on the side of the road instead of on the road. Merging onto traffic or roads after a turn is very difficult for some people, and it can get more difficult as we age. Not following speed limit laws. So that not only means not going over the speed limit, it also means not driving excessively under the speed limit. So here in California, if you're driving 10 miles an hour under the speed limit, you can get a ticket for that. What happens with people is that when they're not processing information correctly like they used to when they were younger, they think that they're going the speed limit, but they're not. They need more time to process information that they're seeing. Getting lost while driving is something also that's very common. I talked to a woman who said that she had gone to her hairdresser 2 blocks from her home. And when she drove home, it took her 5 hours and she still couldn't find her home. So finally, she ran out of gas and a police officer helped her and he helped her get home. And I asked her, why couldn't you find your way home? It was only 2 blocks. And she had been going to this hairdresser for 20 years. And she said, because there's construction there and it confused me. So there are different reasons that people can get lost while driving. Another thing that I see commonly is that older adults sometimes don't give right of way to pedestrians, and they'll drive rather than letting the pedestrian cross. As we age, we tend to have significantly slower reaction time, which means that we don't hit the gas pedal or the brake the same that we used to when we were younger. It's also very difficult to back the car. A lot of people have arthritis, and so it's difficult for them to turn around and look when they're backing. Also, engaging the correct gear. When I'm doing my driving assessments with people who have cognitive impairment, they have difficulty discerning between all of the different gears, even though it's marked in the car. And another thing that can happen as we age is that people tend not to make a full stop. So they'll step on the brake, but not stop, and then keep going. Or sometimes they'll just tap the brake several times, but that's not stopping. When you stop, you have to actually stop and then go. So how does dementia affect driving? The first thing that goes with dementia or starts to go is the short-term memory. And so I've talked to people who couldn't remember where they had planned to go, or they can't remember the sequence of the places that they were going to go, with the grocery store and the doctor's office and the different places that they need to go. Another thing that people with dementia have difficulty with is abstract reasoning. I hear all the time that they don't know how to use a car except for their own. They can drive really well in their own car, but they can't drive in the test car. And I always use a car. I work with a driving instructor, and he has a car that has dual controls. I will not test people in their own car, even though it is good for them to be in their car because they're more familiar with it. But we need the safety of having the second brake. Also, people with dementia don't have good judgment, and they won't self-regulate. I have seen repeatedly people who are very unsafe drivers, but they argued with me that they were still safe and they weren't having any issues. Yet the family will report to me the issues that they are having with driving. Reaction time is significantly slowed down with dementia, so people are going to respond to things much more slowly. Also, the executive functions can be impacted by dementia. So that means problem solving, making quick decisions, being able to change lanes, searching for new addresses. All those things can become difficult with dementia. And then something that's really impacted by dementia is your depth perception. And so it's difficult to tell how far away cars are, how fast they're coming, all of those things. It's difficult for people with dementia to discern that. And then the visual processing skills are also greatly impacted with dementia. So what are some real world concerns that you can look for if you're concerned about a friend or a loved one with their driving? One is confusion with filling out forms. So if they go to the doctor's office and have difficulty with that, if they're not taking their medications correctly, also if they have visual deficits, so if they report to you that they're having difficulty with some area, difficulty with financial management. I've seen that happen very frequently with people who have dementia because they don't know how to manage their money anymore. Also, we need to look for new medications that may affect driving, and that includes over-the-counter medications as well as prescription medications. Even over-the-counter medications can cause difficulty with driving. And it's very frequent for people with dementia to have a compromised physical status as well. People get arthritis, they may have difficulty walking, they may have back pain, neck pain. So there's a lot of physical things that can happen in addition to the dementia. And then people with dementia will typically have coordination problems. And sometimes we, as loved ones, will observe someone that is having difficulty. I went through that with my own father. I rode with him in the car and I was terrified because his driving was so bad. And when I expressed it to him, he said, "I'm driving fine. I've been driving for a long time. You don't need to worry about it." But I was worried. But the problem is, sometimes people, your loved ones may not listen to you. So that's why you may need to bring in a professional to help you out. So what do I do with the driving assessment? I have written testing. So what I'm looking at is their cognitive functional skills, their ability to multitask. As I mentioned earlier, driving is the ultimate multitasking that we have to do. And so we have to really be able to pay attention to a lot of things at the same time. We have to have good memory because we have to know how to work the car. We have to know what all the laws of the land are. And we also need good visual processing skills. So we need to be able to take that information through our eyes and then process it in our brain, and our body has to respond to that. And then, of course, I do a driving assessment. So in the driving assessment, I don't tell people turn left here, turn right here. I ask them to name 3 different places that they go to all the time that they're really familiar with. And so then I just observe their natural driving, whether they drive too fast or too slow, if they stop at stop signs, if they follow signal lights, all of those things I'm looking at. And then the clinical assessment, I'm looking at strength and coordination of the arms and legs, if they have adequate neck range of motion, their visual acuity and processing skills, their ability to multitask, if they have good reaction time, if they have good memory, if they know what all the laws of California are, since I'm in California, if they have good abstract reasoning. So if they see a car over on the right side approaching an intersection, they have to figure out, is that car going to stop or go? What am I supposed to do? So they have to be able to have good abstract reasoning. I've already mentioned depth perception several times. And one of the things that I've seen with people is that they tend to have significant emotional reactions to mistakes or errors. So if I point out an error to an individual while they're driving, sometimes they respond in a very magnified way. So is this truly a problem, dementia and driving? There are over 5.5 million Americans living with dementia, and the estimate is that at least 30 to 40% of them still drive. So that's a significant amount of people who are still driving with dementia, and either somebody has not referred them to the doctor, or the doctor hasn't seen that they have an issue, or something along the way has happened that these people are not being tested. And I advocate getting people in. If you have cognitive impairment, if you have dementia, you need to be tested for driving safety, because at some point in time, your driving will be affected by that. So by mid-disease, the risk of having an accident is much higher than any other driving situation, and that includes brand new teenage drivers. People with dementia have more accidents than the teenagers do. More motor vehicle accidents with dementia involved are deadly or result in serious injuries. Okay, so what are symptoms of concern? What do we need to look at? If a person is getting lost on familiar routes, so like the woman that I talked about, she went 2 blocks to her hairdresser and drove for 5 hours trying to find her way home. If a person is having slow reaction time or even near misses, even if they're not getting in accidents, but they're getting close to it, that's a symptom of concern. If they have errors with turning, changing lanes, backing up, signal light, all of these things, these are all indications that they may not be safe to drive anymore. And as I mentioned before, emotional distress happens frequently with people who have dementia. In the driving test, I've seen people get very angry at pedestrians for having the gall to walk in front of them because they believed that they had the right to go, even though in our state, the pedestrians have the right of way. Multiple fender benders. I tested one gentleman who I always ask them, have you had any tickets or accidents in the last 3 years? And he said no. And so he showed us his car because he was really proud of his car. And the entire car was full of dings and dents from him running into things. And what I found out is that he had actually been referred to me because he lived in a retirement community and he had run into many of the other retirees' cars because every time he would go into the parking lot or leave the parking lot, he would play bumper boat. He would back up and hit a car and then go forward and hit a car, and he would eventually make his way out of the parking lot. So he had a car full of dents and scrapes. And then speed not matching. So I know I've mentioned this earlier, but if they drive too fast or too slow, these are symptoms of concern. So when to give up the keys? If a person is not following the speed limit, if they're driving 10 miles an hour or less under the speed limit, that's a reason for concern. If they don't stop fully, if they're easily distracted. So I always tell people when I'm talking to older adults, you need to be really careful about not having the radio on, not talking on the cell phone, not talking to passengers, because people can be easily distracted by the conversation and then they won't drive safely. Making erratic moves, reacting too slowly, hitting curbs, trouble with turns, tickets or accidents, getting lost. One of the things that I hear all the time from people that I test is that car came out of nowhere. And that is absolutely not true. That car came from somewhere. It's just that the person didn't see the car. Confusing the gas pedal and the brake, that happens frequently when I'm on the driving test too. And I've heard this a lot too. Those drivers are driving too fast. They should slow down. Well, it is true that a lot of drivers in Southern California drive fast, but people who have poor processing skills aren't able to manage seeing all the cars that are driving, no matter what speed they're driving. So if my patient or client or family member is diagnosed with dementia, do they immediately have to stop driving? And it depends. It depends on their skill and ability. Are there other diseases present? Do they have arthritis? Do they have something else that's interfering with their ability to drive? Are they aware whether they're making mistakes or not? And it's really important early on in the diagnosis to talk about alternate transportation, because you can't get someone into a crisis situation where, for example, I've gone in and I have to tell someone you're not safe to drive anymore, and they're not prepared for it. And so they don't have any alternate transportation. So it's good for the family to find out what those alternate transportations are so that you're prepared if your loved one has to stop driving. It's a very delicate topic, and the AAA has a booklet out about how to talk to an older adult about their driving skills, and it's a really good book. So assistance to stop driving. Doctors in the state of California are mandated reporters, which means that if they know a patient has dementia, they're supposed to report. Do you think they report? They don't. Most doctors do not report. What I found is that the doctors don't want to lose their patient, and so they will not report people to the DMV. That's why doctors refer to me, because then I'm essentially the bad guy and having to tell the person that they can't drive anymore. You can ask the DMV, you can ask police officers to help out. And I have a driving assessment program in Southern California, but there are other driving assessment programs in California and throughout the country. So it's important to find out where an occupational therapist is who is a driving expert and can help you out with this. One of the things that family members ask me, what can I do? What can I disable the car? Can I keep the person from driving? So you can take the keys away, but the problem is I've often found that people have another set of keys hidden somewhere. So if you decide to take the keys away, you've got to take all the keys away. Sometimes people just say, look, my daughter needs a car. My mom is not safe to drive anymore. I'm just going to give the car to my daughter and be done with it. But this can cause a lot of family turmoil. So you have to be very careful about the way that you handle this. I just wanted to show a picture of brains. What happens with dementia is that the brain can actually shrink. And so on the left side is a normal, healthy adult brain. And on the right side is a brain of a person who had dementia. And you can see it shrinks about a third of the size. And you can see that the vesicles are much larger than they are on the left side. And if you look at the back, at the top of the slide is your visual center. That also has shrunk significantly. So you know that a person who has dementia is going to have some sort of visual issues, visual deficits, which impacts the ability to drive safely. So as I just mentioned, looking at the top of the slide, the back of the brain, it shows you how much the brain is impacted by this disease. So what are transportation options in your area? In our area, typically the senior centers will have taxi vouchers so people can get a discounted ride. There are a lot of transportation options now in Southern California, and so we do have the ability for people to be able to continue doing their normal activities but not drive there. So what skills are needed to use alternatives? Is your loved one able to get on a bus and get the right route and be able to make it to the place that they're trying to get to? You have to really look at the skills of the individual and can they take alternate transportation. Also, how do these options impact their role in life, their responsibilities, their safety, their income? Some of the people that I've tested are still working, and they've told me, I can't work if I can't drive. So you have to look at all these areas, and if that's an issue, then you need to come up with some solutions for it. Is the individual able to find their own alternate transportation acceptable? And I've seen that it's very, very difficult for a lot of people to be able to say comfortably, okay, I'm not going to drive anymore. I'll take this alternate transportation. So taxis, Uber, Lyft, friends, family. In Southern California, there's several home care agencies that will actually provide a caregiver to take someone anywhere they want to go. So you just have to call the agency and then you can get a ride for the individual. Accessing the bus or city transportation may be an option for some people, but with a person who has dementia, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to step into a complicated task like that after already having dementia, and if they've never had to use that transportation before. So the city bus may not be a good transportation option. And then there's GoGo Grandparent. For people who don't have smartphones, they can call GoGo Grandparent and get a ride anywhere they want to go. So this is the book that I've written. It's on Amazon. If you want to learn more about how dementia impacts driving, you can go on Amazon and buy my book. Here are places that you can go to find people who need driving assessments. So the State Occupational Therapy Association, the National American Occupational Therapy Association has a list of all drivers. So I'm not sure where my audience is from today, but I do cover all of Southern California. I just wanted to mention that I have formed a memory center OC with Dr. Mahakian, Dr. Papard, and Dr. Schodemeyer. And we provide memory and neurocognitive disorder assessments. We also provide safety assessments for in-home care and care management, as well as the driving assessments. So here are my resources. If you want to contact me, my information is at the bottom of the slide. Are there any questions?
Kim, you're on mute.
How silly of me. I don't usually do that. I feel so dumb. Sorry about that, everyone. I was just saying that was just such a valuable topic, Debbie, and really useful information. And wow, some of those examples you give are really pretty scary. Yeah. So I'm sure you have a lot of stories like that. But
I do.
we appreciate you being with us here today. And before we go into the questions and the answer period, I just want to give a shout out to our sponsors once again. We are so grateful to Irvine Clinical Research, O'Connor Mortuary, Care Choices, Hospice and Palliative Services, and Caring Companions at Home for continuing their sponsorship of our webinars. And just in case anybody leaves, before I have a chance to tell you information about next month's webinar, we have one of our popular speakers coming back to be with us, Becky Lamaka. She is going to talk about grief in a pandemic and share some practical tips for caring for the bereaved. And so that webinar will take place on Tuesday, February 9th at 11:30 a.m. So looking forward to yet another great speaker, Becky Lamaka, Grief in a Pandemic, Practical Tips for Caring for the Bereaved. And so with that, let's open up the question box and see what we have for you, Debbie. Let me just maximize that so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, so well, let's see. I think this question got answered early on through your presentation, but can patients with dementia still drive? So you did talk about that was based on their skill. And
Yes.
What else was it?
It's based on their cognitive processing skills, their visual processing skills, their driving ability, their ability to have good memory to remember what the laws of California or whatever the state is. So it's based on numerous systems. It's not just one system.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Debbie. Do you need a diagnosis of dementia in order to utilize GoGo Grandparents?
No. Anybody can call GoGo Grandparent.
Okay. Any tips on how to encourage a client to even be assessed by you?
You know, it really depends on the individual, how open they are. So I've had some people who are pretty resistant to it. It's really difficult. And usually the family can give me tips about how to approach them, or I give them tips on how to approach. So it really depends on the individual. It's hard for me to explain it because that's a broad question. But sorry about my dog. So one of the things that the family can do is say, your doctor said that you need to do this. So sometimes the person will listen to the doctor where they may not listen to the family member, or sometimes the family will say, I'm concerned about you driving my kids in your car. They've told me a few things that happened that they were afraid, and I just want to make sure that you're okay. So it's a different approach for every individual.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you, Debbie. Is GoGo Grandparents nationwide or only available in certain states?
I am not sure about that. I believe it's available in certain states. I don't know the answer to that. So you should be able to research it online.
Great. There's several comments about amazing presentation, and wow, I've learned a lot today. Well, I'm sure you'll get lots of feedback similar to that. You mentioned a book from AAA that includes questions to ask. Is that on your resource list? Do we have that on the list? Yes.
So I have the AARP 55 Alive and AAA Safe Driving. So both of those agencies or businesses have lots of information about driving in older adults.
Okay, good. Is there such a thing as sleep driving?
So
People
I'm
getting up and
assuming
driving in their sleep?
I actually was driving down the freeway a few weeks ago and I saw this car weaving in and out of the lane. So I slowed down and then I decided I'm going to go drive by the person and see what's going on. And it was an older woman who was falling asleep at the wheel, and she was going between 3 lanes, weaving back and forth. Every time her head would fall, then she'd suddenly wake up and straighten her car.
Oh my gosh.
You can't really sleep when you're driving because you will get in an accident, but this woman was sort of sleeping and driving at the same time. It's not safe. It's not safe for any age to do that. If you're tired, you need to sleep before you drive.
Were you able to get her attention or do anything?
I tried to. She kept falling asleep, so I called the police and I kind of drove by her till I saw the cop coming, and then I let him handle it.
Good job, Debbie. What if your loved one gets permission to drive from the doctor or some other professional, but what I see is very concerning? Do I report what I'm seeing?
So you can report to the DMV directly. You can do that. Unfortunately, there are doctors out there who don't understand how dementia affects driving, and they won't report the individual, and I have run into that a few times. One of the things that you can do is ask the doctor for an order to get your loved one tested, and then find a driving assessment program and have your loved one tested. But you do have to have a doctor's order to be able to get them tested. But sometimes doctors, like I said, they don't want to lose the patient, and so they aren't that strong about telling people that they should stop driving when they're no longer safe to drive.
What does the law say they should do, though? What's mandatory?
It is mandatory by California state law that they report.
And can you clarify for me whether that occurs with an Alzheimer diagnosis, an MCI diagnosis, a dementia diagnosis?
So in our California state law, it specifically mentions Alzheimer's and dementia. MCI is an interesting thing because I've seen people with MCI who absolutely could not drive safely at all, and other people who did great and passed the test well. I think probably the diagnosis is really important, and it's it's a possibility that the doctor diagnosed a person with MCI when they actually have a type of dementia, and that's why they do so poorly. I am not sure, but I have seen people who drive with MCI who do great. And as long as it doesn't progress, they might be able to continue driving safely. It just depends on whether the MCI progresses into something else.
I think my concern has always been that people receive a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment and then they just hang on to that diagnosis for years and never go back for more testing because of that. Yes.
We have a request. Can you please show the sponsor slide?
Yes.
Thanks.
Can you put the next slide up? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Michelle. So again, my concern has always been that it keeps people from going back for additional testing after they've been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. A year or two passes, they may have by then developed dementia, but they don't go back to the doctor, maybe for fear that they will get that mandatory order going out to the DMV.
The fear is definitely a big part of it. I have to say, though, that there is a group who specializes in testing for cognitive impairment, and I had a whole series of people who had an MCI diagnosis, and all of them flunked the driving test. So MCI does not automatically mean that a person can continue to drive.
But I don't think that it has to be reported when it's MCI. That's what I'm trying to clarify.
Correct.
Okay. All right. I thank you, Debbie. I've noticed my aunt is forgetting she told me something. Often she will state she never said things. Oh, I guess that's just a comment. I wonder if you are ever surprised with someone you test does great when someone does great with the driving eval. Does that happen, Debbie? Do you have people that do great?
Not very often, but sometimes they do. Okay. I have to be honest, because of the clients that I have, all of them have some sort of cognitive impairment. So they come into my test and I know that they have an issue going on. But there have been a few people that did well, and so I passed them. Sometimes I will say to people, you need 2 to 4 driving lessons to continue driving, or you need to be tested again in 6 months. So sometimes there's a caveat on me passing them, but I have to admit that a majority of people that I test don't pass because they're not safe to drive anymore.
And that kind of leads into the next question. How often should someone with dementia be reassessed for their driving ability? And is that every 6 months?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Debbie. Let's see. What if my loved one is safe to drive, but they can't maintain the car properly? The car is actually more dangerous than they are.
Is that due to cognitive impairment? Not keeping up with the car?
I believe so. I'm not sure.
So if that is true, I would be very concerned about their ability to drive, because you have to have the ability to keep your car in good shape as well as the ability to drive safely.
Gotcha. Do you have suggestions on how to approach a doctor to notify about your loved one's driving challenges?
So if you've seen them having driving challenges, then you need to report the specifics to the doctor. I actually tested a gentleman who had more mistakes than anybody I've tested in 21 years of doing this. And the doctor wasn't the one who initiated it. It was his family who initiated it and insisted on getting the order for him to be tested. And then 2 weeks after I tested him and told him he couldn't drive anymore, his daughter called and said, "I'm really grateful that you got him to stop driving. My brother decided to take the car," and she said 2 blocks from where Dad lives, the car burst into flames and he burned his hands getting out of the car. And she said there was a recall on the car that he didn't pay attention to. He ignored it because he had dementia and didn't figure out that he needed to take it in to get it fixed.
Well, that maps back to that question about not being able to maintain the car properly. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Wow, that's an amazing example. Gee. Okay, so what would you recommend for a family member who is saying they feel their loved one should not be driving? What's the first step?
So if you want your loved one tested, you can refer to me or another driving program and have the individual tested. And then you're going to have concrete evidence whether the person should continue driving or stop driving. And that's the best way to find out. A doctor in a doctor's office is probably not going to be able to do as thorough an assessment as we do, because we do written testing as well as behind the wheel. And by that time, we have a really good idea of how the person is functioning cognitively and physically. So doctors usually can tell that a person is having a cognitive issue, but they may not know whether it impacts driving or not.
Thank you. So many seniors live alone. It's very difficult to get them to take steps for their future loss of abilities. They get angry if I just mention anyways that they could have a better, any ways that they could have a better life while aging. I see them struggling with some basic healthy choices. This could include getting hearing checks, sleep apnea testing, vision checked, change in diet, or adding a supplement. So I think that was just a general comment. So I would add to that that approaching people about driving would be a similar difficult subject that,
Yes.
you know, that we all struggle with, definitely. And
Yes.
it sounds like this is a provider who has the best of intentions at heart for her.
Here's what
seniors,
I do.
You know,
When I'm telling people that they are not safe to drive anymore, I always say, you really need to continue doing the activities you love to do. If you love to go to the senior center every day, you need to continue doing that. You just can't get there by driving anymore. So whatever activities you enjoy doing, keep doing it, but find alternate transportation.
Right. And again, having those, researching that up front when you're dealing with your family members and having those suggestions in mind can be good. And please reach out to our helpline. We have a whole list of alternative transportation similar to the one that Debbie shared. And Helpline is very well versed in talking to families. They do this all the time about driving. And it's another resource that you can have in your tool belt. Let's see. Do you have any comments about driving a stick shift vehicle for better alertness?
A stick shift is a very complicated task. And if a person has cognitive impairment, they're unlikely to be able to coordinate all of that.
Yeah, that's very complex. And talk about multitasking while you're trying to pay attention to the traffic and the road and shifting during, you know, going in and out of lanes. I don't even want to think about that.
Yeah, difficult.
Is a particular type of car model more safe for seniors? For example, like a small SUV?
So amazingly enough, that all the car manufacturers are coming out with all these indicator lights to say if you're too close to someone, let's say you put on your left blinker and the indicator light comes on, it means that there's a vehicle there and you can't get over. So there's tons of stuff that they're putting into the new cars now, but here's the caveat. If a person has cognitive impairment, they're going to have a much more difficult time learning how to use all that, and having all those lights and indicator sounds coming at them that's something brand new may make their driving worse than it already is. So yes, it is helpful for some older adults, but probably not for people with cognitive impairment.
Right, agreed. Should you call 911 when you see that erratic driving on the freeway?
Yes.
Absolutely. Do you have to declare someone incompetent to remove their license?
Only incompetent to drive. You don't have to prove anything else, just incompetent to drive.
And I think you already said this, but I mean, you can do anonymous reporting to DMV.
You can.
Yeah.
You can.
And we can help you with that through the helpline as well. Let's see. What else? Can we bypass the doctor and go directly to you, Debbie, for a family member to be tested? Or do you need the MD referral first?
I have to have an order. In the state of California, if a therapist works with an individual, we have to have a doctor's order. So it may not be, it could be a specialist, it could be the general practitioner, whatever doctor is willing to write that order. I need a doctor's order to be able to do the assessment.
Okay, it can't be a nurse if the doctors don't report?
A nurse.
Oh, this is another question. I'm sorry, it's another issue. They're wanting to know if the doctor doesn't report, like to DMV, can a nurse report it? Anybody can report it, right?
Anybody can.
Okay, okay. We are at 12:33, so just as we're going to keep going with the questions, but just to let those of you know that logged on in a timely manner at 11:30, you have satisfied your 60-minute requirement, but we would love it if you stay on. We have a couple more questions, but just letting you know that you have met that requirement. And again, I want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors. As you can see them on the screen: O'Connor Mortuary, Caring Companions at Home, Care Choices Hospice and Palliative Services, and Irvine Clinical Research, along with Alzheimer's Orange County. Again, our webinar next month we're bringing Becky Lamaka back to talk about grief in a pandemic and give us practical tips for caring for the bereaved, and that will take place on Tuesday, February 9th at 11:30. Okay. Someone wanted me to share that her mother-in-law would fall asleep driving at about age 80 and would wake up on someone's lawn.
Here.
And of course she lost her license. That was in Atlanta, Georgia. Oh boy.
Oh my gosh.
As a driving rehab specialist, what is your opinion of the DMV form DL62? And what
is that?
What
the
is that?
Reporting?
It must be.
I'm assuming that's the reporting form. So I fill that out on every person that I do not pass. I hate to say this, but I don't trust the doctors because, as I mentioned, doctors want to preserve that patient relationship. And so not all doctors will report to the DMV. So I just have gotten into the habit of reporting everyone that does not pass my test, just so I make sure that the DMV is aware of what's going on.
Very good. Do you advise to begin a dialogue in advance about
Yes.
like early stage, about the point at which people will have to stop driving, and then collaborating with them on a contingency plan when that point is reached?
Absolutely. I think
Great
that
question.
I think the conversation can even start before a person even has symptoms of forgetfulness, because that way you have an understanding early on. If this happens, then we are going to do something about it because we want you to be safe. We love you and we want you to be safe. So I would have that conversation even with a parent who doesn't have any cognitive impairment and say, if you ever show signs of forgetfulness, let's talk about what we would do. But you need to do it early on, and it needs to be by a family member who has a good relationship with that individual. They don't typically want the doctor to address this issue. And if you read the studies about it, they'll say that either a spouse or a favorite child or grandchild somebody in the family that they're close to and they trust, that's the best person to initiate the conversation.
Great. Let's see. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to all these questions. So we'll do a few more questions, Debbie, but if we can't get to all of the questions, will they be able to reach out to you?
Yes, so I switched it to the slide with my email. You're welcome to email me or call me and ask me your questions.
Okay. Thank you, Debbie. Are you still doing testing? You're still doing the evaluations during COVID?
I am. Everybody has to wear a mask. The driving instructor I work with, the individual I'm testing, and myself, all of us have to wear masks.
Okay. And what are the average costs of the evaluation? Is it ever covered by insurance?
Unfortunately, insurance does not cover it. I charge $600 per evaluation. It's because I go to the individual's home. They don't have to drive anywhere. I come to them. It takes me about 3 hours to do all of the testing and give them the report at the end. And there's 2 of us who come out to do this job. And so that's why I charge the money that I do.
Okay. Okay, I think with that, we're just about at 12:40 now. So I think we're gonna go ahead and conclude our webinar. I wanna thank you so much, Debbie, for sharing your time and this special expertise with us. To all of our attendees, thanks for hanging in there with us. We went a little overtime as we often do, and we have such an interesting speaker. Please watch for the survey. It should open up immediately on your screen when I end the webinar for all of us. Also, it'll be emailed to you 1 hour after the webinar ends, and we need you to complete this survey within 24 hours. And we rely on this feedback to make improvements to our programs. We appreciate the comments. A lot of you made comments already, and keep them coming because it really helps us, like I said, improve as we go forward. And it's required. This feedback, the surveys are required for your CE credit. Also, don't forget to visit our website, www.alzoc.org, to learn more about our free education programs and webinars, and also to visit our library of archived past webinars that are there for you to watch and learn from. And we thank you all for joining us today for our first webinar of the new year, and look forward to seeing you soon in the future for more education. Thanks again, Debbie, and thanks to our sponsors and to all of our attendees. And have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.